Good morning, boys and girls. It's time for chapter 66 in front desk. All right, looks like we're going to finish it today. So, where we left off, the loan sharks are in town. And let's see how this goes with these guys. All right. It was decided that the next afternoon, the loan sharks would come back with the $50,000 and my parents would hand over our passports and IDs. I walked to school with nails in my stomach. It was the last day of school as we all cleaned out our desks and counted down to the last hour. Jason walked up to me. Ooh. Hey, he said. In his hand, he was holding a pencil. It was my sparkly green pencil. Been meaning to give this back to you, he said, handing the pencil to me. I looked down at the pencil in my hands. I'd expected it to be super short and beat up by now. I'd had visions of Jason's dog chewing on it, Jason stabbing things at home with it, wearing it to a nub. But it was exactly the same length as before, and as beautiful and sparkly as ever. Thank you, I said. This means a lot to me. I hugged my pencil in my hands. I'm sure you'll write great things with it, he added. I looked up at him, surprised. Like the piece you wrote about coming to America. A smile stretched across my face. Thanks, I said. Jason looked down at the floor. Sorry I made your year so miserable, he said softly. It's okay, I said. I'm sorry, too, well. I could see in his eyes I did not need to remind him about the time in the auditorium. He probably remembered every day. Here, I have something for you, too, I said. I reached deep into my pocket, my backpack, and pulled out the thank you letter I'd been meaning to give him. I'd been carrying it around in my backpack for months. Jason looked down at the note, surprised. He smiled as he read my words. As I turned to leave, Jason reached out and touched my arm. What? I asked. He's bluffing. There is no other buyer. It's just you guys. He'll take a lot less for the motel. I stared at Jason. His brown eyes blazed with courage. But it was his kindness that blew me away. When the school bell rang, I ran. All right, this leaves us to chapter 67. Let's see how this goes. Now they can play hardball with Mr. Yao. All right, here we go. Chapter 67. I ran as fast as the wind could carry me, adrenaline powering my skinny little legs. With each step, I whispered a prayer. Please let me get there before the loan sharks do. I turned the corner onto Coast Boulevard just as the loan sharks' Cadillac pulled into the motel. As the three loan sharks got out of their car with their suitcases full of cash, I raced into the parking lot screaming, Mom and Dad, don't do it! Mr. Yao's bluffing! My parents promptly called the deal off. The loan sharks grumbled about how they came all this way and went to a great deal of effort to put the money together. So my dad gave them $20 for the gas and their troubles. And they piled back into their car and left. As they drove away, my parents collapsed onto the ground. Whew, that was close, my mother exclaimed. My dad put his hand over his pounding heart as he stared at the wide open sky. Thank God, my dad said. As my parents lay panting on the side of the parking lot, I walked over to the front desk and called Mr. Yao. Mr. Yao, we'd like to make an offer on the motel, I said. $300,000 and not a penny more. He said yes. I screamed, running through the motel. The Weeklies were in Hank's room playing Monopoly. When they heard the news that Mr. Yao agreed to sell to us, Hank slapped the Monopoly board and all the pieces went flying. What'd I tell you, Hank said to Billy Bob. If it can happen in Monopoly, it can happen in life. Mr. Yao came over with Jason and his real estate agent the next day, as did Lupe's dad, Mr. Cooper, the immigrants, Mr. Abion from the convenience store, Mr. Bagwadi from the laundromat, and some of the motel essay people who had driven down because they wanted to see their new motel with their very own eyes. Mr. Cooper brought over his lawyer friend who helped us draw up the contract. There were so many people we couldn't all fit in the manager's quarters. We had to put chairs and tables out in the parking lot. All right, let's get this over with, Mr. Yao said. It took ages for Mr. Yao and his agent to count up all the money. When he was finally convinced it was all there, Mr. Yao lugged his bag over to his car and dumped it into the trunk. His agent then sat down with Mr. Cooper's lawyer and pored over the sales and purchase agreement. We all huddled around them, watching as they wrote in each of our names under buyer. There were so many owners. We needed 3 additional pages just to fill out our names. My father's voice shook as he told the agents how to spell his name. I never thought this day would actually happen, he said. Me neither, my friend, said Hank, putting an arm around my dad's shoulder. Me neither. When everyone finished signing their names and Mr. Yao officially handed my parents the keys, Lupe and I jumped up and down screaming, "We did it! We did it! We did it!" Jason smiled. You know what I'm going to do? Hank asked, his eyes twinkling. What? I asked. Hank ran toward the sparkling blue pool. He let out a yelp as he jumped in, fully clothed. Hey, Mr. Yao called, but only with a fraction of his usual force. You can't jump into my pool with all your clothes on. It's not your pool anymore, Hank called back. Mr. Yao opened his mouth to protest and then closed it. One by one, Lupe and all the weeklies and essay people and immigrants jumped in too. My dad threw my mom in, and my mom shrieked with glee. Everyone was waiting for me to come in. I turned to Jason. Are you coming? I asked him. Jason turned to his dad and asked if he could. Mr. Yao scoffed. You don't want to go swimming with those losers, do you? He asked his son. Jason shook his head. No, Dad, he said. I'm going to go swimming with those winners. Hand in hand, we jumped into the pool. Oh my. Geez, things are getting serious with those two. As we splashed and swam in the sun-kissed water, my mother suddenly remembered something very important. Wait, she said. Let's get a picture. I'll take it, Hank jumped out. As he held his hand up and clicked, I looked around at my new family and smiled. It was a picture I'd been waiting for a long, long, long time. That is the end of Front Desk. All right. So I figured I could tell you a little bit about the author now. Here, I'm going to read. Here is a picture right here of Kelly Yang. And let me read a little bit about her. Many of the events in Front Desk are based on reality. Growing up, I helped my parents manage several motels in California from when I was 8 years old to when I was 12 years old. As a kid, I both loved and feared the front desk. I loved the thrill of working, the fact that I could ask an adult for their ID and they'd have to give it to me. I was also petrified at night. I would go to sleep with the choking, painful anxiety, not knowing what might happen in the middle of the night. The part about Mia's mom getting beaten up actually really happened to my own mother. Would my parents still be there in the morning when I woke up? At school, I couldn't talk about it with my friends. How could I explain to them that my parents came to the United States with only $200 in their pocket? That for the first year I slept on a mattress we pulled out of the dumpster, hoping my parents greeted me before the stench did. I'm hoping my dreams greeted me before the stench did. I also couldn't explain the love and hope that grew out of poverty. How much I bonded with the weeklies, how we watched out for one another and celebrated the joys together, however small. How my parents hid fellow immigrants from the boss and used a blue baseball cap on the front desk as the secret sign. How a pair of stray cats had kittens on the back stairwell, and we had the kittens in the rooms too. How my dad made soup for the customers when they weren't feeling well. How we became a family. Our new family helped us through the loneliness and frustration of our situation. The fact that we left behind our friends and family in China, thinking we were going to the better land, only to see our friends and family get rich back home in a way no one could have ever foreseen. There were 536,000 immigrants from mainland China living in the United States in 1990. Unlike the Chinese immigrants who came before them, the post 1965 Chinese immigrants were predominantly skilled. They were highly educated, leaving behind good careers. They took a bet that China was not going to change. Yeah, well, they were wrong. Many of them left with very little money because China was still fairly communist in the 80s and early 90s. China has, of course, modernized greatly since then. There's no longer the one child policy. Now there's a two child policy. And apartments in Beijing and Shanghai now cost several million US dollars and come with private showers. But in 1990, China's per capita GDP was only $317 US. That means the amount of money each person made. Once in the United States, these immigrants struggled to survive, working long, excruciating hours in manual labor jobs for very little pay. The median annual income in 1989 for Chinese immigrants in the United States was only $8,000 lower than that of any other immigrant group. This unique set of circumstances made these immigrants particularly vulnerable to exploitation and hardship. No group of Chinese immigrants before or since came with quite so little and gave up quite so much. Later, some of these immigrants would go back to China and not recognize the country they had left. They would not recognize their brothers and sisters in their designer clothes and handbags. Their brothers and sisters would not recognize them. Neither would the new Chinese immigrants, who would arrive in business class and not understand why anybody would ever turn to the loan sharks. I grew up listening to the stories of these immigrants, stories that brought tears to my eyes and chilled the air in my lungs. I'll never forget when my mom's friend came to stay with us and confessed that he worked 18-hour days and slept in his boss's basement because his boss took away his passport and ID. I stayed up all night writing his boss a letter. Though I was just a kid, my letter scared the boss and my mom's friend was freed. I hope in telling these stories, these immigrant struggles and sacrifices will not be forgotten. They will not be forgotten. And to the nearly 20 million immigrant children currently living in the United States, 30% of whom are living below poverty, I hope this book brings some comfort and joy. You are not alone. Somewhere out there, someone in the universe understands exactly what you're going through, including all the fears swirling in your mind or your parents' minds that you're just a bike. Well, you are not a bike. Finally, I hope through this book, more people will understand the importance of tolerance and diversity. The owner of one of the motels we managed told us not to rent to African Americans, saying they were dangerous. Ridiculous. This infuriated us, and we did not ever listen. To this day, my family and I are forever grateful to the many, many wonderful people from all different backgrounds who made us feel welcome in our new country and helped us in times of need. Often through tough times, the first instinct is to exclude. But this book is about what happens when you include. When, despite all your suffering and your heartache, you still wake up every morning and look out at the world with fresh, curious eyes. All right, boys and girls, that is the end, officially the end of Front Desk. There are a couple sequels. Hopefully you remembered stuff because this is in the battle of the books. All right, have a great day.